Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to another 1/400 scale diecast model aircraft review of this, the Boeing 747-400, rendered here in 1/400 scale by Gemini Jets. The Boeing 747, it is a true stalwart of the skies. It's been flying since 1969 with its introduction as the Dash 100, and it has seen variations and evolutions all the way up to the present day, from the Dash 200, the SP, the Dash 300, the Dash 400, and now in its current guise, the Dash 8 in its intercontinental passenger configuration, as well as the 8F cargo configuration. The 747, it has spent a half-century in the air, and in all likelihood, it's going to spend another half-century in the air, at least in some capacity. Not only is it a stalwart of the aviation industry in terms of civil jets, but it's also been the basis for several very high-profile military and government aircraft as well. So I would definitely say that the future remains bright for the 747, despite the current turbulence as of late that has absolutely rocked the aviation industry in terms of, well, the demand for flying has gone down. But it will come back, and I do believe that there is still a market for the wide-body quad jets of the world, the 747, the A340, and the A380, of course. But here, we're talking about the Dash 400. It is the penultimate, as of this date, variant of the 747. It is, of course, evolved from the Dash 300, and the Dash 400 first came into production in 1988 when it took its first flight in April of that year. To date, it remains in service with several high-profile carriers around the world, although it is starting to become phased out, not only by its evolution, the Dash 8, but it's also starting to be replaced by some smaller aircraft in the ubiquitous wide-body twin-jet scheme. So we will see what the future holds in terms of widespread use of the 747-400, but they are still flying, and I think that they will remain flying alongside the Dash 8 variants of the 747 for some appreciable time to come nonetheless. Let's take a look at this 1/400 scale model by Gemini Jets and see what they have given us here in this British Airways liveried 747-400. Before we take a closer look at this Gemini Jets 1/400th rendition of the Boeing 747-400, a look at the box from whence it came. Coming in from screen right, here we go with our Gemini Jets 20th Anniversary Edition box, because this is, quite obviously, a 2018 release. As is typical with Gemini Jets, we've got ourselves a rendering of the aircraft here with gear retracted. Rendering is a little bit larger than the actual model itself, but pretty much par for the course, made for collectors by collectors there in the upper right of the front panel. Look inside tab down there at the bottom left. And then, of course, we have got British Airways Boeing 747-400 trademark. Across the bottom, we have got this airplane contrailing apparently, and we have got 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft. On the bottom panel, Gemini Jets logo, as you would expect to see, and then their selling points, which do not vary on any of their boxes, as far as I can tell. Across the right side panel, Gemini Jets logo, another rendering of the aircraft, smaller this time, Boeing 747-400, 1/400 scale die-cast model, and then our item number, GJBAW1792. Top panel, basically the same as the bottom, with our legalese, though. Adult collectible model, warning contains small parts, not suitable for children under 14 years of age, and then our barcode, as you can see. Left side panel, Gemini Jets. This is a label from the distributor showing you when they got it in stock, and then, of course, another rendering of the aircraft with our item number once again. The Look Inside tab, here we go. We flip that up, and then there is the void, and then, of course, across the top, we have got ourselves a write-up about this particular model, and there it is. We shall read it presently. Can't get the entire thing into frame, but oh well. Boeing 747-400. The Boeing 747-400 is the latest growth variant of the dependable 747-100 aircraft, whose lineage dates back to 9 February 1969. On this date, the first 747-100 took to the skies from Everett in Washington. Even though the aircraft was successful from its onslaught, questionable word choice there, pressure from the world's airlines for an improved version needed to be addressed. Boeing answered this call with the even larger 747-400. The 747-400 was launched on 22 October 1985 and first flew on 29 April 1988, creating a new era in world travel. With more powerful engines and a two-man crew for added efficiency, the 747-400 now meets these requirements by hauling larger passenger loads over greater distances in both safety and comfort. There we go, very diplomatically written there, but the word choice of onslaught is highly questionable there. I would say introduction, debut, inaugural flight, something like that. But onslaught, that has very bellicose connotations. Anyway, the Boeing 747-400 in schematic view, length 231 feet 10 inches, height from the bottom of the main gear to the top of the tail, 63 feet 5 inches. And then over here, we've got on the right side, top-down schematic view, wingspan 195 feet 8 inches. And then the specifications on this particular airframe. Livery obviously is British Airways. The aircraft type is the Boeing 747-436. Construction number was 25824. Line number was 1200. Registration is Golf Bravo Yankee Golf Foxtrot. The engines are 4 Rolls-Royce RB211-524Gs. First flight of this particular airframe was 5th of February 1999. It's delivered on 17 February 1999. Empty weight 363,600 pounds. Cruising speed 555 miles per hour. Range 6,900 miles. And the seating is 360 in mixed class or 523 for high density. And then, of course, they're telling you to go visit their website down at the bottom, which I'm sure we all do copious times per month. However, that is what we've got on the box, and it is a pretty much run-of-the-mill, par-for-the-course Gemini Jets box, all things considered. Some more detailed information about the 747-400. It is, of course, a wide-body jet airliner meant for civil aviation, although it does carry passengers and freight, and sometimes a mixture of passengers and freight in the Dash M variant of the 400. But for the most part, the 400 is a people carrier, and it is still in service today with many carriers around the world, although it is beginning to be phased out, either in favor of its later iteration, the Dash 8 747, or the ubiquitous twin-jet wide-bodies are definitely coming among us. So some carriers, including British Airways, are phasing out, if they have not already retired, the 747-400s. But, of course, the Dash 8 is filling that void to some extent. But in cargo service, the 400 is still everywhere, as is the 8F configuration starting to come online. So the 747 is still very much with us here in the 2020s. However, it is a wide-body quad-jet airliner, as we can see here, 4 engines across the wings of this vehicle. Why? Well, it was designed principally in the 1960s in the Dash 100 variant, and in those days you needed 4 engines across the ocean. So that's what Boeing did with the initial specifications of the 747, and they've carried that quad-jet scheme through all later variants and evolutions thereof. It is manufactured, of course, in the United States by Boeing, and it took its first flight, as the box rightly stated, on April 29th, 1988. It had its service introduction, again, in the 400 variant with the now defunct Northwest Airlines on February 9th, 1989. Northwest Airlines, they were a major American carrier. However, later on in life, they started to have profitability issues, as many air carriers eventually do, and they were absorbed into Delta Airlines, and the Northwest name is now entirely defunct. You do not see it anymore. 747-400, it does remain in service today. Primary users thereof are Atlas Air, the American cargo and charter airline. Lufthansa, flying these, at least as far as I last checked. I think they are phasing them out, though. UPS, flying them in the freight variant, and British Airways were a big user of the 747-400, quite obviously, as we can see here. Passenger versions of the aircraft were produced between 1988 and 2005, with freighter production extending to 2009. The Combi version, the 400M variant, they were produced from 1989 to 2002. And I believe KLM was actually a big user of the Combi or Dash M variant of the 747-400. In total, 694 400s were built, and the unit costs for the Dash 400 in 2007 dollars ranged, depending on the specific configuration that a carrier ordered, between $234 million and $266.5 million US dollars. The F400F configuration, not talking about the 8F here, the 400F configuration could range between $238 and $268 million US dollars, also in 2007 dollars. It was developed into a couple different versions, and they had some specific applications of those specific versions. The YAL-1 was a test aircraft for optical and laser interference weaponry that was employed by the United States Air Force. However, that program has since been canceled, and it also was the variant spec upon which a further variant was produced, the large cargo freighter, the Boeing 747 LCF. It is technically a variant of the Dash 400, but the Dreamlifter, as it is currently known, very much a different aircraft all around. It only shares the engines and wings in common with the 747-400. The rest is all custom built. Also, the Dash 400 spec serves as the basis for a supertanker aircraft, and of course, one of those is actively fighting fires around the world. Big water or fire retardant drop can be done because they have replaced basically the entire fuselage of the 747 with water tanks. So some interesting things have been done by the Dash 400 variant of the 747. Again, it was produced between 1989 and 2009, in total 694 being produced, and it is still very much a stalwart of the skies. Overall specification on the Dash 400 as we see it here. Exit limit on the aircraft can range between 550 and 660, depending on the class divisions in the passenger cabin, as well as just how many seats they've got in there. Overall length of the aircraft, 231 feet 10 inches, with a wingspan of 211 feet 5 inches. That total wing area, that means 5,650 square feet, or 525 square meters. So again, it is larger than the average house by a factor of 2, roughly. So that is a mighty big wing area alone. Aspect ratio on the wing is 7.91. Overall height of the aircraft from the bottom of the main gear to the top of the vertical stabilizer, 63 feet 8 inches. Maximum takeoff weight on the Dash 400, 875,000 pounds, with an operating empty weight, provided that you had one of the engine options, the Pratt & Whitney engines, 404,600 pounds, or 183,523 kilograms. Fuel capacity, 57,285 gallons, or 216,850 liters. Cruising speed of this aircraft was Mach 0.855, that's 504 knots or 933 kilometers per hour, with a maximum airspeed of Mach 0.92, that's 542 knots or 1,004 kilometers per hour. Takeoff length, in terms of the runway required, 9,700 feet. Overall range, 7,285 nautical miles or 13,490 kilometers. There were a menagerie of engine options available for the Dash 400 variant. In principle, they were the Pratt & Whitney 4000 series, the General Electric CF6s, or the Rolls-Royce RB211s. And we do see the RB211s fitted to this particular aircraft here. Overall thrust output at sea level could range between 56,500 and 63,300 pound-feet of thrust, or 251 to 282 kilonewtons. Again, those numbers at sea level, and then multiplied by 4 because we do have 4 engines on board. So, very interesting specifications, very impressive specifications for this aircraft. Of course, it is one of the largest civil jets ever produced. It's one of the largest airliners ever produced, and it remains one of the largest airliners. And technically speaking, it is the second largest airliner ever built. Of course, we're lumping the 747 and all of its variants together with that, second only to the Airbus A380. With the aircraft rotating once again, we can start to take a look at some of the more macrocosmic features of this Gemini Jets rendition in 1/400 scale. First of all, no, your eyes do not deceive you. You do see that the aircraft is tilted a bit. We've got a little bit of left roll dialed in here on the ground. That is due to the main landing gear not quite being straight. And this is something that we also noted on the reviews that we did of the 747-8, and something that apparently traces back a little bit further in the Gemini Jets lineage here with the Dash 400 747s. Now, this is not the only Dash 400 747 I have. I do have another one which does not really exhibit this feature, if you want to call it that, but it's on this one, and it does bear mention because, as you can see, particularly from directly nose or directly tail on, there is some roll dialed in here on the ground. The way to fix this would be to remove that right outboard landing gear and then to reset it so that it's sitting level, but doing so requires, well, basically breaking the model and then putting it back together and hoping that you can get it back together. So not really something that I feel like wanting to undertake, but it is technically fixable, although It is a production fault, can't get around that. Really would not expect to see something like that out of a model of this general quality, but there it is, and it does bear mention. However, beyond all of that, starting to zoom in, we can start to see more of the details on the forward section of the fuselage. There are the cabin windows and the cockpit windows and our nose landing gear with our radar dome visible there. Very nice. The cockpit windows are nicely done. Windscreen wipers are also there, and you can see that forward cargo hatch there in the forward section of the starboard fuselage. That all looks good. Empennage done pretty nicely. I do believe that the port side horizontal stabilizer is angled a little bit too far upward relative to the starboard side one, but again, that's something that's not unique to this model, and it's something that I have excused in the past, so I will excuse it again on this one. However, everything else looks prim and proper as you would expect. British Airways title graphics there with the British Airways pennant or ribbon, however you want to describe it, looking very nice across the forward sections of the fuselage. That red portion of the ribbon there basically enveloping the upper deck windows across the hump section of the fuselage. That looks good. And of course, the hump is a very distinctive feature on the 747, going all the way back to the first ever 747. First, technically speaking, double-deck airliner it was after all. Very nice though. You can see the auxiliary power unit exhaust there in the tail cone section. That all looks good, just like it was on the Dash 8 models that we've taken a look at. That is a separate element that is mounted inside the tail cone. That's not just a decal or paint or anything like that. That is a separate detail that they took the time to model and place in there. So that all looks very well and good. You can see in the tail section, we got our rear cargo door there on the starboard side. And then, of course, moving farther toward the rear, you can see that we've got our registration. And then we have got our exit doors there across the port and starboard sides. Very, very nice details all around. Leading edges of the wings are done nice in that bare metal look anyway. We've got our strobe light on the starboard wing, and we've got our end fence on the wing as well with that upturn section. That's been, shall we say, not quite homologated in modern design, but it has been refined a little bit more in modern design in terms of sculpting the end fences on the wing tips. But just like the more modern versions, these end fences here exist to try and control wingtip vortices to cut down on drag and thereby cut down on wake turbulence as well, which is a common courtesy to the fellow aviators who are also occupying the skies with an aircraft like this. But all in all, we can, if we can excuse the tilt, the bank angle that we've got here sitting on the ground, the rest of the model comes together very, very nicely. You see antenna details across the top and bottom. We have our dorsal and ventral antennas there in the forward section. They're all straight and prim and proper and look good. Toward the rear, we have another dorsal antenna there, just ahead of the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. That all looks good. Graphics-wise, it's all crisp and clear and clean. No problems with any of this in my book. All the windows and doors and title graphics and everything else, they show up nicely. Nothing's distorted. There are no smudges. There are no misprints anywhere. It all looks very good, and you can see that the quality of the paint overall in terms of looking at the highlights as the reflections dance across the fuselage, everything looks good, and it does appear to reflect some decent surface qualities of the paint and the metal underneath thereby. So all that looks pretty nice, all things considered. Taking a look at the port side of the aircraft here, we'll start to zoom in and take a look at some more details. There we go. There's our nose section, as you can see, highlighted with our main nose landing gear. It's our only landing gear in the nose section. So the nose landing gear, as you can see right there, that looks good. That is sitting straight and level. And then, of course, we have got our nose cone, our radar dome with the shut line visible there, right where the highlight is migrating its way to. And then, of course, moving upward, we have got our cockpit area with our cockpit windows, and over top of the cockpit you can see we've got our emergency egress hatch right there. That's all nicely modeled. That's well and good. First class section, that is in the nose section of the fuselage, the lower deck of the fuselage, and you can see that those windows extend to beyond the center line of the cockpit. So again, 747, some passengers are seated ahead of the cockpit. That's pretty unique as far as civil jets go. And then moving aft a little bit, we have got our L1 door, rather, and then we have got our dorsal and ventral antennas visible top and bottom, respectively, so that looks good. British Airways title graphics and our British Airways pennant there, and then our upper deck egress door, so that's good. Nomenclature question for you. I know that the main cabin entry exit doors, they follow in L1, L2, L3, 4, 5 as far as this particular aircraft goes on this side. But what about this one? Is this the L2 door? Or is this like an LU door for left upper? I don't know. I don't know if jetways would ever directly connect to that door, or if the passengers would all board from a lower deck door and then they would climb the stairs to get to the upper deck should they be seated up there. I'm not sure, but there is a door up there. And of course, it's indicated nicely here with the graphics. Wing spar and wing root areas coming toward midship, that looks good. And then of course we have got our engine nacelles here for our port wing. That looks good. These are the Rolls-Royce RB211 engines, so you can see that we do have these minuscule Rolls-Royce graphics visible on the forward end of both of the nacelles here on the port side. Pods to which the nacelles are mounted, that looks good. And of course they are modeled nicely with the nice contoured lines there integrating with the nacelles quite nicely. Moving further aft, more of our doors, and then our wing tip there with the end fence, and then moving toward our tail cone, the rear section of the aircraft. There we go. Registration is just visible there behind the end fence of the wing, and then moving arrears into the tail cone area. That all looks good. Moving up, there is the empennage, our horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and we do have our antenna mounted right there. That's good. We have a partial registration, Yankee Golf Foxtrot there on the port side of the vertical stabilizer, and you can also see that we have got shut lines for the rudder control surface there. So all that looks well and good. You can just barely see the APU exhaust peeking out from behind the horizontal stabilizer, and then you can see the trim deflection area for the trim adjustment for the horizontal stabilizer in that roll axis relative to our position, but it's really a pitch axis relative to the horizontal stabilizer itself. We've also got these emergency cut here markings in the event that the aircraft catches fire and fire crews on the ground need to get in and get fire retardant in there. In these areas is where they would be able to cut through the fuselage most easily and quickly in order to effect firefighting and rescue operations, but that's all nicely detailed, I've got to say. And so far, so good. I like what I am seeing here. Taking a look at the aircraft from nose on. Now it is painfully obvious that we do have some left bank dialed in here on the ground. So yeah, the camera is pretty much straight and level. The aircraft, however, is not. But putting that aside, moving in toward the nose section, there we go. There's the nose. You can see the cockpit windows with our windscreen wipers and de-ice misters up there. That's all rendered nicely. We've got our nose landing gear there. That is straight and level. That's good. And then you can see how the windows converge across the nose with our radar dome. The shut line is modeled around it. That looks good. And then, of course, our cockpit windows, our main ones, and then our lateral ones. That all looks well and good. Moving across to the right wing, you can see our two engines here on the right side of the aircraft, setting the focus for the engine fans, and that looks really good. Obviously, the RB211, it is a much older generation of jet engine design. It is not really comparable to the engines that they're making nowadays, but for the time, they were pretty good engines, and obviously they're still plenty adequate to fly the Dash 400 today in 2020. So you can see the engine fans there. They're very, very small, but they are modeled there individually. Obviously, they don't spin or anything. That's usually reserved for 1/200 models or larger, but they are nicely modeled. They're not pass-through, obviously. Much lower bypass ratio on this generation of jet engine than what we get nowadays in most of the civil applications, but it is very nicely done for what it is. Additionally, across the leading edge of the wing, you can see that we have got the landing lights out there on either side. That's good. And then going all the way out to the wingtip, you can see that there is a fair amount of uplift in the wings here on the model. That's good. Over here we have got obviously the port wing in a little bit better lighting, so you can see inside the engines a little bit better with the outer stage fan blades there, just intaking all the air before it gets compressed in the center section of the engine, mixed with the fuel and set alight, and hopefully exhausted out the back, effecting some good usable thrust. But there it is. Not bad detailing, all things considered, despite the size of those engines. Very nice. Moving up a little bit more, starting to go up into our empennage area from the leading edges. That all looks good. Setting our focus for it, if we may. There we go. Starting to get in there. Not bad. Everything looks straight and prim and proper in terms of the leading edge profiles there on the empennage. Again, you can see that screen right, the left hand side there of the horizontal stabilizer is sitting a little bit askew relative to the right hand side on screen left. But it's there and it looks good enough. Is it noticeable by eye? It's a little bit noticeable by eye. The camera, of course, magnifying things a little bit, so it becomes a little bit more obvious. But all in all, it's still there. We can excuse that. But again, the landing gear, that is bothering me somewhat more. And it's rather unfortunate because otherwise this is a very nicely done model. Taking a look at the starboard side now of the Dash 400. Moving forward, there we go. There is our nose and cockpit area once again. That all looks fine. I do like the window detailing again on the starboard side. Our title graphics, our ribbon there, or pennant, I still can't decide what I want to call that. And then there again is our door on the upper deck on the starboard side. So again, what do you call that door? Does it just follow R1, R2, R3, or is it R1, R2, and then this is RU or something? I don't know. Do let me know if there is a special name for an upper deck door. However, you do have the doors. They're there. You can see that there is some attempt at rendering the procedure needed to actuate that handle to open or close the door. And then, of course, we have our forward cargo hatch here on the starboard side. That all looks well and good. Our wing root and wing spar area, that's visible. That all looks good. And then our engine nacelles here for the starboard side, our two starboard engines, looking prim and proper. Very nice. Obviously, you can perhaps see in somewhat better detail now the Rolls-Royce emblem that is visible in there on both of those nacelles. Moving aft, more entry-exit doors, and then into the tail cone section we've got ourselves our rear cargo hatch. There we go. And then another smaller hatch that's probably for lab service or something along those lines. There's our wing tip with the end fence and the green strobe for being the starboard side of the aircraft. And then we've got ourselves our registration now visible a little bit more easily as it's not obscured by the end fence of the right wing. We have got our registration. Golf Bravo Yankee Golf Foxtrot. Final door there on the starboard side, and then we get into our empennage area from the right. There we go, moving up. There is our vertical stabilizer again with our stylized Union Jack graphics there. That all looks good. Another little service hatch right in this area, probably for servicing the APU. That's all well and good as well. Wingtip there on the horizontal stabilizer. That looks good. And we get into the tail cone where our APU exhaust is, but we can't quite see that from this angle because of where we're just sitting right now. Taking a look basically directly on at 90 degrees in profile of view. And once again in this view, you can see that we've got quite a bit of left bank dialed in. And also, I want to point out to you, just take a look at the angles of the trailing edges of the horizontal stabilizers for a moment. Yes, you can see that the left-hand one is definitely skewed a bit with I would say, some negative pitch relative to our current camera position relative to the right one. But you can see that they are not quite straight relative to each other. But again, that is something I am willing to excuse. Landing gear, though, not quite as much. Speaking of the landing gear, there are all of our main gear. You can see that the inboard gear are pretty much straight and level, as is the left outboard gear. But that right outboard gear, you can see it's not even really touching the ground so much. Perhaps it is just barely, but again, it doesn't even seem like it is touching the ground. So it's a little bit too short, perhaps. Or is it really too long and it's just not straight? I'm not entirely sure where the genesis of that roll begins with the landing gear, but again, it's not something that I really want to see on one of these. But there it is nonetheless. Trailing edges of the wings, you can see we do have shut lines for our slaps, flaps, and spoilers, and then we do have the exhaust sides of the engines. There is no cone or jet pipe or anything modeled here in the exhaust sides of the RB211s, but you can see that we do have the backside of the engine there, and it's just basically a void that goes up to a blanking panel to which the fan is mounted, I would think. So not as detailed as some other later versions of the 747 that we've gotten from Gemini Jets, but for what it is, passable. No problem with that. Moving across, there we go to the right wing. Very similar story here in terms of the details that we have and do not have. That's good. Out there to our wing tip. That's fine. And then moving back midships, you can see here in the tail cone, there is our pipe, our exhaust for the auxiliary power unit. That looks good. And again, that is a separate unit that is in there and then later affixed via whatever adhesive they use. That is not just a painted on or a printed on graphic. That is actually a separate element that they've put in there. So I can appreciate the effort in that regard. Looks good. And otherwise, the aircraft looks pretty good. It just is tilted over a bit with some left bank. Take it for what it is. And some freehand shots here just to close us out and add a little bit of a capstone to everything. Toward the nose, you can see maybe some more details that we couldn't see from somewhat longer range. You can see that we have the air data ports there across the lower section of the nose, just below the passenger cabin windows. That all looks well and good. And then moving up, we have got our cockpit windows there with the windscreen wipers and anti-ice misters there. That all looks fine. We do have the shut line for the radar dome. Very nice. And then, of course, our cabin windows moving aft. There's the L1 door with the associated hardware on it. That looks good. And then our dorsal and ventral antennas. That all looks good as well. There's the egress hatch over the cockpit that we talked about earlier. There it is. And, of course, you've got an anti-collision beacon light on top of the hump there above the upper deck windows. That's good. There is your dorsal antenna. That's all good there. Straight and level, no problems. Ventral antenna as well. No problems with that. There's our wing root area. You can see where the wings join up with the aircraft. This is a cradle arrangement, as you can see, but it's nicely done. And upon closer inspection of the main gear, you can see our outboard right gear. It is not quite touching the ground. Interesting to note there. However, leading edge of the wing, there it is with our slats modeled there, at least the shut lines for the slats, and then our nacelles and our pylons for the nacelles. You can get a better view of the fan blade detail there on the intake side of the engines. That all looks good. Across the upper surface of the wing, there you go. You can see that we have got the bare metal, and then we've got some silver paint down the center line of the wing. That looks good. And then our shut lines across the bottom for our spoilers, and then our flaps as well. Multi-element flaps there were another addition that were put onto the 747 for the Dash 400, but that all looks good. Of course, our starboard wing looking very similar to the port wing, with our engine fan details again in there. All looks very, very nice, all well and good, prim and proper as far as I'm concerned. Across the top side of the fuselage, some more antennas, some more anti-collision lights. Not bad. Of course, all of these details in here, they're just printed on, but it looks good. And then our empennage. There's our vertical stabilizer, shut line for the rudder, and then, of course, our horizontal stabilizer coming in through there. That all looks fine. Upper surfaces of the horizontal stabilizers, you can see very similar color scheme to the main wings. Shut lines for the elevator control surfaces, that's all well and good. Across the top of the vertical stabilizer, again the rudder shut lines and our Yankee Golf Foxtrot partial registration visible there. And then there is the full registration down below. There we go. Toward the aft section of the fuselage, getting into the tail cone. Very, very good. In the tail cone area proper. That all looks good. No problems with any of that, but my biggest problem with this model, unfortunately, is that landing gear is just not sitting straight and level. No matter how much I try to ignore it, I can't quite ignore it, and unfortunately, my brain makes it a bigger deal than it probably is, but again, it's just not something on a model that costs as much as this does. I mean, it's not overly expensive, but $50, $60, you want it to sit straight on its own wheels, and it just doesn't. But again, it's not really a deal breaker, but otherwise this is very nice, and it's just such a glaring thing that impacts its overall presence on display. I don't really like that, unfortunately. So there it was, in 1/400 scale, the Boeing 747-400 by Gemini Jets here in British Airways colors. Unfortunately, I can't quite ignore the fact that it's got some left bank dialed in, sitting on the ground. Something is up with the main gear, and as you can see, the aircraft here held up by the stand, you can see how the main gear are starting to droop down, and you can see that the inboard gear actually shows some discrepancy as well, with that right-hand inboard gear being a little bit longer than the left-hand inboard gear, and I think that may actually be the culprit. Now, that's something that wasn't quite evident on the ground, but here it is as the aircraft is now held aloft by the stand, not sitting on the gear at all, and everything can just drop down under its own weight. There you go. That's probably the real culprit. So we've got the outboard right-hand gear, which is a bit askew, and we have got the inboard right-hand gear, which is a bit long. So that's probably the real reason for this aircraft sitting a bit askew on the ground, and unfortunately, in my opinion, it does detract from the overall display quality of the model. However, if we are able to overlook that, this is a very competently done 1/400 scale die-cast aircraft by Gemini Jets. These guys are the biggest in the industry, and there's a reason for that. Time and time again, they make all sorts of models, very diverse subject matters, diverse liveries, diverse details that they're also able to incorporate even in 1/400 scale, which is generally somewhat prohibitive in terms of the smaller details that you can render and still have them be noticeable and recognizable and cogent. But they do a really good job with their paint and their tempo printing, with their graphics and their text, with the title graphics and other logos and things that you see on airline liveries. And day in and day out, they really do deliver the goods. So I do have to say that despite this particular example perhaps being a little bit askew on the ground, it still is a very cogent and pleasing package to behold. And again, it's a British Airways 747-400. It's a legend, and I've got to say that I do recommend this one despite the build quality issues that I have on my particular example thereof. But if you do see one, it is, of course, a limited release, as are all of the Gemini Jets releases, but this one in particular being a 20th anniversary release in 2018, you've got the 20th anniversary branding on the box, so if that means something more to you as a collector, perhaps you do want to have one of these ones regardless. Also, with British Airways beginning to retire their 747s, perhaps it's another reason why you might want to have this model. So the production faults, be them as they may, it's still a very nice model, and it's a nice tribute to a great airline in British Airways, and a nice tribute to a great aircraft in the Boeing 747-400, which is out of production now, but it's still flying for the time being. Someday they will all be retired and consigned to the scrap heap or to museums. Let's hope that more go to museums, and let's hope that some museums even keep them in flight order. But for the moment, they're still with us. It is a very fantastic aircraft, as any variant of the 747 is. You probably want this model, therefore. Until next time, though, I do hope that you have enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.